Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're dialing in from today. My name's Simon Newman. I'm the CEO of the Online Dating and Discovery Association, and delighted to welcome you to what is, I'm sure, going to be a fantastic conversation today on what is World Romance Scam Prevention Day. We're going to be talking about the scale and nature of the problem. We're also going to be talking a little bit about what online platforms can do, and we've got some fantastic guests here to engage in what will be a brilliant discussion. So I'm going to start off by introducing our guests, and perhaps if they'd like to say a few words about themselves, and in no particular order, just because you're on the top left hand side of my screen. Jim, I'm going to start with you. If you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Thank you very much, Simon. My name's Jim Stevenson. I'm an inspector with Cambridgeshire Police and the deputy head of the Eastern Cyber Resilience Centre, which is part of a national government programme mainly aimed at small business and charities to help them avoid online fraud. But my background is in police crime prevention, which I've been doing for, well, the best part of a decade now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jim. Chad, I'm going to come to you next.
Cool. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chad Reimers. I lead the fraud and identity portfolio at TransUnion in the UK. What we try to do is leverage the unique data and data assets and insights that we hold across identity, digital attributes, and device to really create profiles around consumers. And what we try to do is identify genuine consumers and make our clients and customers aware of who those genuine consumers are, and then also identify and mitigate the threat of bad actors out there as well. So looking forward to today's discussion.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chad. And remind me, there's a story on the BBC this morning as well. I'll come to that later on today about giving banks some additional time to verify payments that they suspect may be fraudulent. I'll be interested to get your take on that as well. Yep. So thank you, Chad.
For sure.
Very, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Very. I'm the Cyber Protector and Prevent Officer for Bedfordshire Police. I work alongside Jim, doing lots of promoting awareness of how to stay safe online as a overall, and to every kind of person, business, organizations, literally everybody that will have us.
Brilliant. Thank you, Very. Nick.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nick, and I run a service with my business partner. My company is called Scamalytics.com. We work with the dating industry to identify fraudulent profiles. It's a real-time API, and it scores users as they enter the dating site. So it's been developed over the last 12 years, and now we're expanding into banking and payments and classifieds and review sites. So yeah, it's all about data sharing and being able to do real-time analysis.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nick. We'll come on to that in a bit more detail later on. And James.
Hi, thanks. I'm James Rees. I'm Head of Communications for IYE Global, and we conduct highly complex financial crime investigations globally, and deep due diligence investigations, tracking and tracing cryptocurrency across the ledger into bank accounts, and helping platforms to identify scammers. So yeah, looking forward to today's event.
Brilliant. Thank you, James. And last but by no means least, Ben.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm the security manager for Security Everywhere, and it's my job to keep our customers safe and protected from all the hackers and scammers out there. And I'm the right-hand man of Francis West, who I'm sure a lot of people will know if you've been to any of our sessions previously. So we work hard and we play hard, if anyone knows Francis. But I'd just like to thank all the panel for making themselves available today. This is a really, really crucial topic because of the amount of the increase in the romance scams that we've seen. And as I'm sure you'll get to find out from our panelists today, this really is an evil, evil crime, because it's not just the financial aspect of it and people being scammed out of their money. It's the fact that these scams go on for so long, and they actually, they break people's hearts. This is not the fact they've just lost their life savings. It's the fact they've had 6 months of communicating with someone that they really thought cared for them, that they really felt was going to be part of their future, and to have their dreams and their hopes and their emotions crushed like that. It really is up there as the worst of the worst scams. So thank you very much for Simon for bringing this to our attention today, for leading the show, and for everyone else for attending.
Thanks, Ben. Yes, and of course, as you mentioned there, Francis is the one that normally is in the driving seat, but he's trusted me with the keys. So I will do my very best to follow Francis's fantastic examples. And I should just apologise. I've got quite a heavy cold. I know some of my panelists as well have also got colds. It's that time of year, so apologies if we're sounding a little bit different to normal. Okay, well, I want to start talking really a bit about what romance fraud is. Ben sort of mentioned a few things there. I'm going to come to very first from a policing perspective. Tell us a bit about romance fraud. What is it, and how do the scammers operate?
Yeah, so romance fraud is a crime that we define where people develop relationships online. It doesn't matter whether it's from a romantic point of view. It can also be from a friendship kind of side. And the idea is that this person will string them along for quite a period of time. The length varies drastically on anything from a couple of months to 5, 6, 7 years. You name it, and usually there is a financial element involved in it, so it will involve paying for things, paying for flight, telling some stories. Now, one of the things obviously to be aware of with romance fraud is the language that we use around it. We talk about how these people are targeted, but mostly what we would like people to remember is that the majority of us quite like company as a whole, so none of us quite like to be alone, and therefore it's kind of how the people that do this, the criminals that do this, will go for that approach. So they will join that Facebook group that may have things in common, and then someone will strike up a conversation with them because actually they just quite want some company, and then they just think it might be something naive and friendly, and then next thing you know, you're trusting this person and telling them, and then the scammers will use that, the criminals will use that to then draw out information from you and make it more relatable. The same way that, for example, why people on dating sites because they want to meet someone. So therefore, it's a perfect opportunity for them to be there and to create these profiles. There are usually some common themes that we see in types of what it is. So they usually will pick a profession that it requires the person to be abroad. So, for example, Medics Without Borders or Médecins Sans Frontières tends to be some of the ways. So they'll pick a doctor kind of thing. They can be celebrities. That is also one of the ways. But they will use that as the way to start their conversation. Sometimes they'll be grieving like widows and partners, and then that's kind of how it starts. I have watched and read enough with a woman called Elizabeth Carter. She is an expert in romance fraud, and she studies linguistics in criminology. And one of the things she reads and talks about it is the language that is used. And she described being in a romance fraud very similar to coercive control, where there is a lot of that, and there is a lot of ensuring that you keep that information private, that you don't tell your friends and family that you're talking to this person. They have so many sophisticated technologies nowadays where they can mirror that image using AI, you name it, different softwares, where the picture of the person you're talking to on video or that video you're watching is live, it's moving, it's not just a steady still image. And they will use different means of communication. And she described it as that form. And if we looked at it and treated victims of romance fraud similar to what we treat people with coercive control, we would find a very similar pattern in them and how they get attached to it. And people lose huge amounts of money. Like there is a huge financial problem with this. And that is kind of where this is particularly concerning. And then sometimes they'll go on to ask what they call it. We call it pig butchering. It's a horrible name, but it's the idea that you get them to invest in cryptocurrency predominantly, or pay things in cryptocurrency, because obviously we'll know it makes it a lot harder, but it goes in different places. But what we also have to remember is that people that are involved in romance fraud and romance schemes, they are also a victim, but they also can be seen as victims and suspects of money muling, because money is moving the accounts from. So it is important that people remember and recognize it, but you can't just come up to someone and say, you are on this. Like, do you not realize it? Because they're so entranced. It's like you swing something on them and then they just like don't see anything. So there is definitely a careful conversation to have if you witness someone in your family or you know someone that may be on this, and start that conversation slowly. But the majority of the victims will say to you they're 100% ashamed of it. I've never met a victim of romance fraud that never said to me, I can't believe I was that stupid. But we say they're very good at it. If they weren't, they would be out of job. And I would be out of a job as well. But, you know.
There's a lot of things I want to come back to, and I think we'll talk about what to do in the event that you think a family friend, may well be a victim of a romance scam. But interesting about sort of the scale of the problem. I was reading something this week. Santander, the bank, suggested that I think they'd seen over the last 6 months a 27% increase in the volume of romance scams and costing their customers around about £4 million, with an average loss of around about £4,500. So, like you were saying earlier, Very, it clearly is quite impactful and a significant issue for lots of people. And I guess the other point I wanted to make is that romance scams can happen on any online platform. I think when I was talking to Action Fraud and City of London Police a couple of weeks ago, they were sharing some data with me, albeit very high level, but suggests that you're probably more likely to be a victim of a romance fraud now on social media as opposed to online dating scams, because the verification there is a lot lower. It just perhaps needs a password and an email address, which I thought was quite interesting. And people may not necessarily be aware that they're going on a normal social media site and could be targeted by a scammer in that way as well. So I think some really interesting things. Tell me a bit more about I guess the journey you described there about what happens where a scammer identifies a particular target or a victim. What normally happens? How does it work?
So they will look for things that they have in common. So, for example, I had a lady that I dealt with. She joined during the pandemic a K-pop group, Facebook group, which her kids had introduced her to K-pop. She was watching and reading loads about it, and she literally just joined this group, this Facebook group, who had hundreds of thousands of people, because she just wanted to chat about it. And then this person then started to reach out to her and said, we'll talk on a different platform. So they moved on, I think, to Instagram to talk, and they had a profile and they started talking, and it was literally very general conversations, and there was like common interests. Obviously, one of the things that we need to be mindful of is that how much information we always share on a general basis with the world. So whether that's on Facebook or any social media platform, we're sharing lots of information about ourselves, which makes us a lot easier for someone to target us because they got a lot of information about it. And this lady was caring for her husband, who has a cardiac dementia. So he's really far into it. And she was really struggling, and she was alone. She has friends and families, yes, but she wanted that company. And, her husband caring for a person with dementia is very difficult. And then so she was able to relate that kind of thing to this person, and this person, who was the criminal, found their golden opportunity. It's that this is it. And then they kind of simulated and said, yes, I know, I've been through this. And that's kind of how it then evolves. And, if you're talking about widows, for example, and losses, it would be in a similar manner, or even on Instagram. And if someone slides into your, the Gen Zs will say slide into the DMs, they dropped into your DMs and you start a conversation. It could be something basic and they could like your story. And you might just start in a casual chat. And depending on some days they'll ask you, how are you? And you might feel that you're open and you could be vulnerable with that person. And you will say, yeah, this is, I'm not doing well today, or I had this and this happened. And then that's it. That's their golden opportunity. And then they will use that to then be able to pin things and then develop that long-term relationship, I guess, through it. Before they ask for money, the asking for money, what we found, is never right at the beginning. It's like there is a building of it. You've got to build a rapport, right? I can't message you, Simon, on Instagram, slide into your DMs and says, you're a very handsome looking man, and have a full-on conversation with you, and then 2 days later ask you, I would like to come and see you, and I'm based in another country. You'd be like, nah. And this is the difference. Whilst if I wait 2-3 weeks, 4, and I can see where this is going, and we talk every day and this and this and that, and I say all the right things at the right time, then I can say, I was maybe considering coming to see you, but I'm stranded in, I don't know, in the Middle East at the moment because I'm doing this project and for this charity and this and this and that. And it sounds a lot more plausible. And you might be like, okay, I'll give you a hand. and this and this and that, and then from then it just takes on. So it's never at the beginning. It's never something like really, really immediate, which is part of the problem.
Yeah, and I think the point there that I take away from that is just the level of detail that the criminals are using to conduct the story around that profile. And I'd be interesting. I'll perhaps pick it up maybe with Nick later on. I'm interested about the deep fake side and how the use of artificial intelligence potentially is making this harder to spot as well. So I think, really good point. And I guess as well, the other thing, and I'm gonna come on to Jim in a second. Jim, we were talking in the pre-meet there just about the fact that this is often, much wider, or potentially there's much wider criminality going on here as well, that it isn't just an individual targeting another individual, that perhaps part of more of an organized crime gang that has other implications as well. I mean, what's your sort of experience, Jim, of this? And you must have seen quite a broad variety of things.
So thanks very much, Simon. So Very's right. This is all about the same tricks and psychological traps that any exploitative relationship is based on. And often the scammers that run these kind of operations, they're obviously targeting multiple people at once. As Very pointed out, this isn't a 10 million texts a day saying, hi, you've missed your parcel. This is a significant time investment on the part of the online criminal. So the rewards have to be significantly higher. Like any exploitative behavior, it's going to fall into sort of a 4-step approach by the criminal. There'll be the find aspect of it, which I'm sure some of our other panelists will cover in much better detail than I will. But you're right, Simon. Why stick to finding people on known dating apps when actually what you're seeking to do is set up an exploitative relationship? It doesn't have to be an intimate relationship. It can just be a friendship. And then there'll be an experience phase where, as Very says, they build rapport. That'll be where the criminal does their research on your existing social media footprint and establishes, themes of commonality between you and them. There'll be a lot of lying, but leaning into, we lived in the same area of the country. We like the same types of music. And that's all about building the experience with the victim. And then when you kind of move into the hooked phase, that'll be where it becomes, actually, I'm in a bit of a bind at the moment. I'm stuck in this country. I'm struggling to meet my bills. I've also got sick parents. Whatever the hook is that encourages you to start empathizing, sympathizing, and above all, wanting to help the person. And that's just playing. That's criminally exploitive behavior, playing on our empathy as human beings. And it may never move into the final stage of exploitation, which is trapped, where actually when you realize perhaps that actually this relationship's not what you thought it was and you're trying to back out. And then that'll be when potentially the scammer moves on to exploiting, maybe some personal information you've shared or some sensitive information you've shared. And that'll be the bit where it moves from almost the romance fraud of it and into good old fashioned blackmail. Which is like, well, actually now you can't get out of this relationship now because you've told me all these things. And if you leave now, then I'm desperate. I'll be forced to share it with all the people I know that I've also met through you on social media, or I'll be forced to post the details I've obtained for you on the internet. I think one other thing that's worth pointing out about this: a lot of the individuals that unfortunately end up working as scammers in this field are themselves victims. They may well have been criminally trafficked. They may well have been duped into taking jobs outside of their home country, only when they get there to discover that effectively they're working in a cyber scam sweatshop. It's very difficult there, because actually, even if as a victim, if they then lean into that, I'm really sorry I targeted you, but you don't realize the horrible situation I'm in. That may also be part of the scam. Maybe the nearest thing to the truth in the scam. I suppose the big problem, if you're a victim of this, is you are being pulled into a kind of rabbit hole of exploitative behavior. And like any other exploitative relationship, whether that's child criminal exploitation by criminal gangs, whether it's domestic violence, as the victim, often it's that you're the least likely person to see that you've become a victim. And this is where we go back into messages that we deliver to all sorts of groups of people around this behavior. Is actually it's the people around you who need to spot that you're a victim of exploitation. When we talk to young people about criminal exploitation by gangs, actually, it's your friends who are likely to realize or suspect that you're being exploited well before you are. And so kind of the key message for me here as well is, you know, if you have friends or relatives, or I don't know, maybe your parents, if they've gone through divorce or bereavement, and you know that they're seeking friendship and company online, you need to be involved in that conversation. And I can assure you, as a child of a bereavement, you know, when my mother decided to get back into dating after my dad died, my God, that was a hard conversation to be involved in. But actually, you know, if I hadn't been involved in that, that was the time when she was vulnerable to being exploited. And luckily it didn't happen to her. But if I'd have fallen into the trap of actually, I don't want anything to do with my mother's new relationship, that would have been the time when she would have been at her most vulnerable. So, you know, this is a real field where we really do have to look out for each other. And as Very says, that conversation, if you're now starting to get suspicious about the relationship that's being cultivated with your friend, your loved one, your children, your parents, whatever, you know, oh my God, that's a hard conversation to have with someone. You know, this person that they're investing time and effort and are gaining solace and companionship from. And for you to then start that conversation about, I'm worried this might be becoming exploitative. Yeah, I'm afraid there's no easy primer for that.
No, I was just going to ask you about that, Jim, because I guess one of the things that makes this such a successful type of scam and so hard to resolve is that people don't want to believe that they've been duped. You know, as Very said, this is a relationship often that's been developed over a period of weeks, if not months, possibly even longer. And you've built a bond with this person online in some capacity. And for someone else to point out to you that actually this isn't who they say they are, I guess is a very difficult message to give. And probably a lot of people are in denial. Is that right, Jim? Do you think that's the case?
Yes, that is true. And even when confronted with the fact that they are, even if it's been reported, let's say it's been reported to the police and a Protect officer like Very's been engaged to assist the victim. One of the things we do see is victims, even when confronted with irrefutable proof that the relationship is exploitative, they will still stay in it because actually in their head, they've added up the cost of the relationship and the value they're getting from the relationship. And then it becomes very transactional. And we do see some victims go, actually, fine, I believe you. This person's been stringing me along. It's, you know, all they're after is my money. But I'm not giving them that much money and I'm actually getting some emotional fulfillment out of it. So I'm going to stay in contact with them. And yeah, very, very difficult.
Yeah,
absolutely. And, you know, I suppose the only benefit we can get from that as the police and the people who are trying to safeguard these people is, well, at least they're now a knowledgeable and willing participant rather than, you know, than an unsuspecting victim. Yeah, but you know, there are support groups, as Very's pointed out, from I think it was Elizabeth's work. You know, actually, support groups do exist for people who are in these kind of relationships or have recently got out of these exploitative relationships. You know, and if you think you've got a friend or a loved one that's trapped in one of these relationships, or you've just managed to help them out of it, then it's not something you have to deal with alone. Essex Police, for instance, are running a pilot at the minute where they're running like a support group for victims of romance scams, where they can talk to people who've had similar experiences and, you know, cross the I'm not alone kind of minefield barrier and get back into a sort of healthy, sane and semi-trusting lives that we'd all like to live.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'm going to come to Chad in a minute, but one question just to throw back to Jim and to Very before we move on. You know, if you do suspect that someone is a victim of a romance scam, or that you're worried, you know, from a policing perspective, what's your advice? Where do they report it? Who should they speak to?
Oh, Very, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll start that one. Hopefully I won't get killed here. So obviously, I mean, the hardest thing will come with it. It will come with the stigma. I think someone mentioned in the comments, there's a huge stigma around this, like a huge stigma. And I think that's part of the problem. But once that's overcome, and let's say, yes, I've realized this is what's happened to me, and I want something to be done about this, whatever that done about it is, we would highly recommend people to refer them to and report to Action Fraud. Obviously, is our main platform from it, and have as much information as you can from it, and keep that. If you are the person, the parent, or the child that that your parents are the ones that have experienced it, or your grandparents, or whatever it is, and you're the reporting person, then it's important that you highlight any vulnerabilities that you think that person is experiencing, because otherwise it makes it really difficult for us to be able to deal and separate what is what. So please, reporting it to Action Fraud, then report it and contact your bank, because that is where the crux is going to sit. And this is where, if you are a family member or a friend or whatever, and you know that person remains vulnerable and can be a victim of it, and all that comes with it, then go into a bank, like go to the branch if there's a branch still around it, and have a conversation about this. Because the victim that I was giving you the example from, her bank never noticed the payments, and it was because she went into her savings funds, in her investment funds, to withdraw the fund, and that person at the investment fund that said, no, you're not withdrawing it. And she was like, but why? And it says, I need to have a really serious conversation with you. Where are you going to send this? And then she explained, and he was like, right, come in for a chat, come in for a coffee. And she said, until then, we're not doing anything. And that was the first person that had a conversation with her, and that made her realize what was happening to her. And she said, if it wasn't for him, I would have given a load of money that I had saved and worked hard for my whole life, and all my savings from this. And that was the man that did it. And it was that person at the investment funds that stopped it. So the more awareness there is on it, and the less stigma we have, and the less confrontation we go towards these people, the easier it is for us to be able to stop it, but also to be able to investigate it. Because, we always say, with regards to Action Fraud and reporting it, at the end of the day, if there's hundreds of us reporting the same thing, it raises alerts, it raises flags. It's not, people think we just report to the police, nothing gets done about it. We're looking at a needle in a haystack sometimes. And that's where that's where we find, at least if you report it, it helps. Jim,
Definitely.
Have you got any more?
Thank you very much. Well, I'm just going to summarize that in a sense. I think do report it. Obviously, we've got audience from around the world, but certainly from the UK, Action Fraud, and thanks to Ben and to Mac putting the links up on the screen there, so you know where to report it. I think it's a really good point about the stigma, which is really key. And I want to come to Chad now, because I mentioned earlier, there's a story about the banks today potentially been giving up to 3 days or 3 days more to review potentially suspicious payments where they think they might be fraudulent transactions. So it gives the bank a little bit more time to investigate. But Chad, one of the things I was really keen to ask you, we've talked about what happens with the scammers and how they operate. And then, of course, they at some point are able to extract some funds from the victim. What happens next? Where does that money go? What do they use it for? You must see this and have a fairly good image from around the world.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's one of the tougher perspectives, is where does the money go? I mean, that's probably not so much where TransUnion sort of operates. What we're trying to do is actually prevent and stop these activities taking place. So I'd say what we sort of see is more about how some of these scammers and fraudsters are using data available to them to actually build profiles, build artificial profiles, and actually engage with victims. And I guess one thing I would call out, we spoke a lot about awareness, but I think that's probably where we're struggling a little bit globally, and in the UK. We all know sort of the context of the broader fraud problem in the UK. 3 million victims reported to CIFAS, for example. But I'd say that one of the challenges is really in the romance scams place. So when we talk to consumers, again, I know I'm focusing more on the front end rather than the back end, but that's really where it starts. When we talk to our consumers, we run a consumer pulse survey to understand what's of concern to consumers. And from an identity point of view, most people are concerned about certain things like breaches and malware and phishing. But what's really low on awareness is romance scams. So if we look at a generational perspective, less than 5% of consumers call out romance scams as an area that they're concerned about.
Wow.
That compares to 40 to 45% of individuals who call out traditional things like phishing and breaches, which I saw in one of the comments as well. So the challenge is that the awareness isn't there as much. And the other thing I'd call out, so I've spoken a little bit about the consumer side, but again, focusing on the what's happening and how much activity of this is actually happening. I thought it'd be interesting to the audience to share that we manage a fairly unique database around device insights, and what we've seen is that yes, there's been a gradual increase in fraud over the last couple of years, but we do this by sector, and what we try to identify is risky transactions that are taking place on marketplaces, online dating platforms, and so on. And what we've seen there is that there has been an increase in what we call the community sector, which includes online dating, social media, marketplaces, and we've seen that community sector actually growing 10% year on year in terms of those risky transactions. So versus overall UK perspective of 2%. So I know I answered more about the upfront, but I think that's really important, Simon, because we don't sort of focus so much on what happens after, because we're in our business, what we're trying to do is identify and mitigate the fraud at the front door as much as possible.
Wow, I think that's fascinating, Chad, and some really interesting statistics to back that up as well. And are there particular trends that you're seeing elsewhere, or things that you can also share with us that you're getting from the insights that you're pulling together there?
Yeah, I mean, so the device profiling is really, really interesting, and that's where you can sort of get behind the mask of the identity that's being presented, and you can really look at the device side of things. So what we do a lot of with this device consortia that we operate is really look for suspicious activity. We look to create graphs and networks of locations of devices of customers, and we do this through fairly advanced analytical techniques to do that. But there was an example we were looking at. One of my colleagues pulled out a really interesting piece of work that showed by looking at a single profile, and what we try to do is fingerprint devices. So we create one profile per device. But what we saw I'm going to call it a profile, not a person. What we saw this profile do was they set up a money transfer account in a, let's call it a London sort of location. We saw that profile interact then with various different websites, including online dating websites. We then monitored this, well, not monitored, but we actually saw this activity continue on different devices, different IP addresses, different email addresses, and we saw this continue over a couple of days. But what was interesting, we then saw this activity on this profile switch over to an Eastern Europe location, which indicated that this person was using a VPN or some form of masking. We then saw continued creation of dating accounts, and then finally an attempt to access a money transfer account. So basically, by looking at all this insight, what we're trying to do is flag risk to marketplaces, to online dating websites, community forums, or obviously to banks, gaming companies, that sort of stuff. But I guess what my point is that there's all these stories that we're talking about, but a lot of this is being done on a device, and the key is for people have to intelligence around what's happening on the device, flag risk, and then it's incumbent on organizations to step in and help protect consumers, because that's really what consumers expect is to be protected when they're on that marketplace or community forum.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chad. Now I'm going to come at the end, and I'm going to ask you the question about, I'd say one to think about for the next 20 minutes, but if you were to have a kind of a wish list of the things that would help, whether that's levers pressed by government or the banking institutions or elsewhere, that would really make a big dent in the threat that's out there. I'd be interested in getting your thoughts in a minute. James, we're going to come to you next. Really keen to hear your sort of perspective around romance fraud and your role and what you've seen.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. Now, just picking up on some points made by Chad then, because it's really interesting looking at device-based data. And I think this is where sometimes the problem lies in the ability, or should I say inability, of some KYC platforms to identify risk at a sufficient level. I mean, we're fortunate that we've been running very complex financial crime investigations for banks and corporate institutions for the last 20 years. And the development of our investigation platform, Cobra AI, it enables us to link seemingly unconnected people, which gives us a huge advantage when we're pursuing different threads in a criminal investigation. But if you put it in the context of KYC, it's looking beyond the identity, it's looking beyond the device-based data, looking beyond the location-based data, and linking that digital footprint to real-world entities. You know, and the key outcome of that is, who is this individual? You know, who are they connected to? Are they connected to a criminal network that's conducting scams, any degree of criminal or suspicious or fraudulent activity? So we can feed it back into the app or the social platform or to the bank, just to say this individual presents a risk. It's a major problem, and I think when you look at discussions that we have with certain platforms, that, and forgive me for saying this, but there seems to be a degree of profit over safety. You know, technology is in the market now to prevent romance fraud by cutting out the criminal and fraudulent profiles that are committing the scams we're discussing today. But as from what we see, there's little movement in engaging at the right level, because we'd just be wiping off millions from the bottom line if we take out all the profiles that are paying 29 quid a month. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm just going to come back to something you mentioned there, and I'll just ask again if people want to put in any questions. I know there's some comments which I'm keeping an eye on, which we'll refer to in a minute, but please do keep your questions coming. You talked about feeding that back into platforms, and you mentioned there perhaps the likes of the Apples and the Googles of this world with the stores. You know, is that, as opposed to going after the platforms and providing that, is it potentially more effective working with the likes of the Apples and the Googles of this world to deal with it at the App Store perspective, or what? So I'd just be interested to see where
I think from the, it's almost two parts here. You've got prevention, you know, you've got preventative measures, proactive measures, and reactive measures. You know, we work in very much in both sides. We've got the reactive, where we're investigating financial crimes and recovering money lost to romance fraud. But when you drill back and you reverse engineer the entire scam, you're back to the point where the scam happened in the first place, which is the platform. So it could be the social media platform, the dating app, for example. But from what we see is that the KYC capabilities, the technologies that platforms are using from external providers, these providers are aggregating data from typical open, you know, probably thousands of open source channels, where there's probably 80% of that information is false and inaccurate anyway. You know, they're doing facial recognition using open source platforms, just aggregating data from Google, for example, and social media platforms. So yes, a platform can say this identity is being used in 30 other instances of scams, and they can quickly, hopefully, create a risk for that individual. But they're unable to suggest, is this individual committing crime or connected to criminality, which is very, very important. But I think from going back from previous comments made today, again by Very and Chad, you know, this is a huge problem in terms of the types of crime that we investigate. Romance fraud is probably the most difficult from an investigative point of view, because of the emotional journey that the client has been on and is still on, and probably will be for many years to come. You know, we were talking to a girl in the States a couple of weeks ago. She'd lost a huge amount of money. I mean, several $100,000.
Wow.
And we couldn't she was absolutely adamant that the person she was talking to was probably about 50 miles away from her. We had to break the news that this individual was based in Estonia. And the trading platforms that they'd been doing together in cryptocurrency was just fake. These are highly sophisticated criminal networks running these scams a lot of the time. So yeah, it's I think a lot of the onus needs to be on getting access to the correct technologies to conduct due diligence to prevent these scams from happening in the first place.
Oh, that's brilliant, thank you. And just for the audience, KYC, if anyone's not familiar, that's know your customer. We're using our TLAs, our 3-letter abbreviations. But no, that's brilliant. That brings us neatly on to Nick, actually, talking about technology. And tell us a bit more about the work that you're doing with particularly the dating industry, which I'm very familiar with, Nick, and the work that Scamalytics do. Tell us more.
Okay, so I guess thanks, James, for that. That's very insightful. And I guess we work in a similar way, but we don't know your customer. So when potential fraudsters and normal dating site users are arriving on dating sites, we want to quickly be scoring quite quickly and assess whether the person who's registering on the site is a scammer or not, or a real user. So there's a couple of things you can do. You can look at device, you can look at IP, you can look at images, you can look at text, you can look at other things, behavior, put that all into an algorithm and go, well, are they a 1 or 100? Are they scoring low or they're scoring high? And we guess basically and say to the dating site, this one's probably real, this one's probably erring on scammer, this one is a scammer for sure. We've seen their photo before, they've tried to access your dating site and you've marked them as a scammer before, so you know about it. So we're all about the data, make sure as soon as the data is coming in, we're blacklisting it, we're storing it. And what's more is, and I think it goes unrecognized that dating sites actually do a hell of a lot in the background to moderate with human moderation in most cases, the good dating sites. So they do a lot to prevent registration of scammers, get them off the site as soon as possible. So what we do is help the dating site themselves prevent scammers from registering, but also monitor, almost like an antivirus, the ongoing journey of users. So when they log in again, we might not have caught them the first time, but we might catch them the second time or the third time. We like to, I suppose we're in the game of preventing. So we've done some good work with the police and Action Fraud, for example. We've done some pilots where they're sharing data with us, and a scammer that was reported on Action Fraud from 2 years ago came up on a dating site. That data is sitting in a silo. It should be shared between industry and maybe even cross industry to prevent each other. So we are a platform, a SaaS, an API, and we help prevent at the time of registration in an almost immediate way. Most scammers we catch in the first 15 seconds, just after they've pressed the register page. We can tell the dating site 80% of the time, in most cases, whether this person is going to be a scammer or not.
Wow, that's incredible statistics. And the thing you mentioned there, Nick, which I think is really important, is that the scammers obviously try and encourage the victim to leave the platform. So the difficult
so this is where it gets complicated. Yeah, this is where it gets complicated. Is if they get through, they try and move victims off the dating site onto social media. It's more encrypted. It takes it up a notch on friendliness. You're in my contact book now, so we're starting a relationship potentially. They don't necessarily need to start on dating sites either. I mean, Instagram groups, Facebook, there's plenty of places where romance scams are happening outside the dating industry. But the dating industry, most well-run dating sites will have, a large portion of the operation preventing fraud, and by no means daters are so sophisticated nowadays. You don't even want to see a dating profile that's fake on the site, because it tarnishes your brand reputation. It's not just about the money. Yes, there are some bad actors out there, but in general, most dating sites, and Simon represents the dating associations. How much work they put into communicating to members, making sure they can pick up scammer behaviors, potential signals, but then also use tools like ours or build them themselves to kind of prevent scammers and other black hat activities from even joining their sites.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, Nick. And as you said there, having joined the ODDA back in June, I've been really impressed with the work that the industry's done to really try and tackle scammers, recognizing that, as you say, you don't want users joining sites where they're likely to come across fake profiles or equally scammers. And often many of these sites will employ a multi-layered approach, some of it technical tools, others more physical tools based on sort of experiences and processes that they've got. So I think there's also, as you say, there's an awful lot of work going on to prevent scammers from accessing these sites, and if they do get on, then from removing them, which I think is a really positive success story. In fact, for the next month, because it's World Romance Scam Prevention Day, today we are within the ODA using the whole month to highlight some of those things that are going on in the industry.
Sorry, do you mind if I just jump in on that?
Please do.
I think everything we're talking about is great, and I think it's all very good that we're kind of pushing the education side. I hate the word romance fraud, pig butchering. Why the heck somebody will using that? I just don't know. What it's preventing people from coming forward. And yes, we've got the technologies to try and prevent them through the KYC due diligence process we're discussing. Yes, with the police and our investigation techniques, we can hope to recover people's funds. But it's the looking after the people, the victims, that come forward that is incredibly important, and is giving them a safe environment for them to come and be supported through this process. It's an incredibly emotional journey that these people have to go through. So I think the counselling has to be integral to everything that we're discussing today.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you're right. The support offered to victims is crucial in this, because it's such an emotional type of crime. Ben, you've been sitting patiently there, and I want to come to you. We've got a question that's come in, and it's about the potential of AI, artificial intelligence, in detecting or at least alerting us to some of these. We mentioned right at the beginning a little bit more about how AI is being used to create potentially deep fakes, which are making it very difficult to tell the difference between a fake profile and someone that's realistic. I'd just be interested in your perspective about how technology has evolved, making this potentially more difficult, but equally there are hopefully opportunities where it might help us detect some of these crimes as well.
Thank you, Simon. It's a very good question from Marcus R via the LinkedIn comments, and it's a real tricky one, and it's actually very relevant to the legal wranglings that are going on between the big tech companies and Europe at the moment, in terms of the restriction of using personal and copyrighted data to train the AI. Because of course it's, they're saying that in order for us to be able to put the technology forward, to be able to benefit and to protect people from these kind of things, we then need to be able to look at the personal data. So they're actually using it as a big reason as to why they should actually have the access where Europe, from the implementation of GDPR and all the privacy regulations around big data and online and all the information available online. The tech companies are saying that we need this to be able to actually protect people against the things that are now occurring. What'd be interesting is that there's some schemes now in terms of actually providing some data along with images and videos to prove the authenticity. So watermarking, actually, creation dates and having modification dates, that sort of thing, so you can see if it's actually been modified. And what would be good again is that we have some standards brought in across the, and the problem with the internet is that it's so open. There is no enforcement, the online, internet enforcement body. So it's up to the regulators to come in, like they're doing in Europe, to have these policies in place. But it takes the collaboration. And at the moment, we just see the politicians and the regulatory bodies fighting against the big tech. And instead of coming together to actually create an environment where they can produce something that's actually going to be constructive and to the benefit of everyone, we've got a confrontation where obviously the regulators and the policymakers want to protect people because they think that the big companies are only after making more money. But actually, the big companies, like you say, they have a self-interest to regulate their own platforms because of their branding. And actually, they can't make the money if they haven't got the tools to keep people safe when they're using their systems. So it's a very open topic at the moment. I mean, for me, it's the deepfakes. They're the really, really alarming thing, and that comes across, all types of different industries and verticals in terms of, disinformation for the elections and things like that. So, and it's very interesting that actually the most prolific use of deepfakes is on social media with fake profiles and sextortion.
Yep.
Actually putting the image of somebody that they're, for whatever reason, the bad actor has a vendetta against, and actually putting their features onto an existing pornographical image or video, and then releasing that online. So it's actually been used much more for the coercion of people and to target people, rather than actually for the political causes where you'd probably expect it to be used. And that's something that it's good that you've highlighted here today. And hopefully we do actually see some movement in terms of having this standardization where we can actually know whether something is an original edit or whether it's something that's been modified. So it's a case of watch this space at the moment, Simon.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned regulation, because I think it's worth just pointing out. Of course, in the UK we had the Online Safety Act, which was passed in the last Parliament. We've got the Digital Services Act in Europe. There's an Online Dating Safety Act that's just gone through the House of Representatives across a pond in the USA. So there's more regulation coming out now, and we're starting to see the likes of Ofcom and the Information Commissioner's Office producing guidance and codes of practice to help industry tackle some of these threats. Just conscious we've got about 7 minutes left before we finish for this hour. Time has really flown today, and I'd like to get sort of each of your takeaways. I did want to come back to Chad first of all, though, and ask that question in relation to a story about banks being given a few extra days to be able to review transactions that it thinks are suspicious in an attempt to try and reduce the number of frauds or the money that's lost to romance scams. Is it going to solve it, or is it just a kind of a half-hearted measure that's the banking industry saying, well, we've got to do something?
No, well, I think it's a really important measure because in this, we've got this situation where everyone wants instant payments, instant access, things to be done quickly via digital platforms, and at the same time we've got these reimbursement scam rules coming in. £85,000 up to £85,000 to reimburse. I mean, that's a lot of money. I mean, that's a lot of cost to a bank to have that obligation. And so my point of view is that it's a good thing that there needs to be that time to investigate. It's very difficult. Fraud operations teams having to work at pace, having to collate all the information that some of the panelists have spoken about and be able to make a decision. There's also a link to what a number of people have talked about, which is the value proposition and having trust. I know when I've had high value transactions checked out by my bank, I actually say thank you for checking before you're allowing that high value transaction to sort of go through. So that's on the transaction side, but certainly on the reimbursement side, I think it's a good thing. I think I'd expect there'll be a push for some sort of tiered approach to that level of risk. So maybe there'll be requirements for quicker reimbursements on smaller amounts and longer on higher amounts. I do feel though that there's a lurking future danger here, which is with this demand for banks to have this responsibility to return, to reimburse, that just creates another vector for bad actors to start to attack as well. And I think that is one thing. While we're doing the right thing, trying to protect consumers and genuine consumers, as always, bad actors are looking for that opportunity to take advantage as well. And I think that's one thing that when we talk to banks that they're concerned about as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a whole topic in itself. But no, thank you, Chad. I really appreciate that. So just coming back to our panelists then for sort of one last thing, really. And Very, I'm going to ask quite a specific question. I'm just interested what advice you give for people to stay safe online. What's the police word in this? How do we keep people safe from romance scams?
Just take one extra minute. Take 5 minutes to think about anything you're going to do, and just be careful and be aware of what you share online as a whole. It's probably the number one thing we say. The more we share, the easier we make for people to take advantage of us, unfortunately, because we're all very trusting human beings, right? So yeah,
I think that's a good point. So effectively saying is just urge a bit of caution, take a bit extra time just to think really before you do anything, and hopefully that will give you time to take a step back and just potentially see if something is too good to be true. But no, thank you, very really good point. Jim, your last thoughts really, anything that you wanted to sort of share with our audience today?
Thank you, Simon. Yeah. So the first thing is obviously please report these offences if you think you know someone who's a victim of one. And I appreciate there's the whole concern around lots of this crime comes from abroad. Is there really a police pursue option available? But pursue is not the only thing the police do. We have a responsibility to help safeguard victims. Protect officers like Very can help victims of romance fraud, even if the offender is out of our reach. And even then, we can still signpost you to other organisations that we know about that provide support, counselling, and effectively you're almost talking about bereavement counselling, to people who have been victims of these horrendous crimes.
Yeah, and I think reporting is such an important thing. The more we know about it, the better the response will be, the more resources get put into it, which is really important as well, and the less, hopefully, fewer people fall victim to what is a despicable crime. Thank you, Jim. James, your last word.
Yes, I think just there's some really good closing comments on there, and I think it all comes back to the fact there are people out here, there are organisations that are here to help people. Absolutely report it to the police first thing, and if you're afraid to do that, come to an organisation such as IYE Global, where we do look after people and we can report it to the police on your behalf. But also if people want to track down the scammers, there are opportunities to do that too. But just come forward, and just keep an eye out for family members who may have been affected, because we've all got to fight this together.
Yeah, and I think that's the message. There is help out there, and it's important to seek it. And if you are concerned, then there are obviously people out there who can support you through it. Thank you, James. Really helpful. Yeah. Nick.
I guess from a tech perspective, data for me, I think we can do a lot more between organizations and industry and law enforcement to help prevent these frauds from happening in the first place. Even a simple email address that was used in a fraud, that is not real data information. It's blacklisted information that can be shared and can prevent somebody from registering. So never mind IP or whatever. There's a lot of data that can be shared potentially.
Absolutely. And I think that's such an important point. Yeah, the importance of information sharing between a whole variety of organisations and policing as well. I think Mac just put up Gary's comment there from LinkedIn, which is absolutely right. If you've never met the person, if you have not been to the home, if you've not met any of their friends, if you don't have proof of where they work, then don't send any money ever. So I think that point about being really cautious, look for those flags, those red flags that might concern us. We've got 40 seconds left, Ben. So I'm going to give you the very last word before we go to our outro.
Don't believe everything you read and see online, and unfortunately it's something that we've been reiterating for as long as I've been in IT. but now it's ever more relevant because of, as we've addressed, the deep fakes and what AI can now do to aid the fraudsters and scammers in their deception. So from that point of view, it's like very nailed it. Take a breath, take a minute to think, is this really it? And I think that's the best advice. I just wanted to say to Advocating Against Romance Scammers, who posted earlier, the links, all our events are available on the Security Everywhere LinkedIn page, and then you can link to that, so you can share this, so that you can actually promote this to other organisations, anyone else who's promoting the Romance Scam Prevention Awareness Day. And just thank you ever so much, Simon. What a top job of hosting today. You make a great substitute for Francis. I'm sure he'll be tapping you up again in the future for your services. And thank you once again for all the panel for giving up their time to address such an important topic. And please do share the links so that we can get this out there to as many people as possible.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. And just to reiterate, a massive thank you to all our fantastic panelists today. Some really great insights and experience, and some great insights into what the problem is and some of those issues and how to keep safe online. So thank you, Ben. Yeah. Thank you, everyone who's been.
And Mac, of course, Mac, the LinkedIn expert and life hacks with Mac. He's if it wasn't for him, none of this would be possible. So thank you once again to Mac and his co-pilot Joel.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day, and look forward to the next Security Everywhere webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
All done.
Wonderful.